Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. Dr. Megan Cannon. How are you?
I'm good, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm good. I've been teasing this podcast. I told people I was going down to Galveston, then I have one that's coming out today as we're recording this, where I talk
Oh,
about that
okay.
this is coming. So this will be out a few days after we record it. Um, but I've been getting the people excited to have you on here, so I'm really excited as well to get a chance to get to know you a little bit better. I got to talk to you and meet you down in Texas. You were a speaker at the Gulf Coaches Clinic. Did you have a good time being down there?
I do. I appreciate that event so much because the coaches are the ones that interface with the athletes so much, and having an event that's specific to coaches that's not super technique based, but more these skills that the coaches can do to like develop themselves and their coaching. To me, it's a really cool event. That's just the return on like that investment for the athletes, huge.
Yeah, and I want to get into that stuff. A lot of the skills that you're teaching and the stuff that you're bringing to the sport of swimming, and I guess beyond the sport of swimming, right? You work with athletes from all kinds of sports, but let's come back and let's get the audience here to know Dr. Megan as a person, even maybe back to your own athletic days. Talk about how you got into sports as a kid, what sports you played, what your experience was like, and some of that stuff.
Yeah, I was the kid that like put their head underwater at 18 months old. And my mom was like, oh, okay, so maybe this is like a thing. And so I started swimming, just like rec summer stuff when I was younger, and then just developed and swam through high school. I also played softball and then, dabbled in like rec basketball and tried soccer for a minute. But swimming, softball, and then I danced for like the whole period of time as well. So those were the three primary activities that for me really stuck. And it was a cool experience, I think, being the multi-sport athlete, because it was gave me opportunity to get sick of one and then get back to it and be excited for it, with just kind of a constant schedule of sport happening. So I think
Right.
for me, it was a really good mix. I decided to retire from sports when I went to college. I intentionally went to a school without a pool. Like I was over it. I was done. My 50 and 100 swim days were over. I continued to dance and I was on the team at my university, but I laid the sport part of my life in that capacity to rest. And that was really when like the psychology side started to grow. And so after that, I went and I got my PhD in clinical psych down at Nova Southeastern University, and they just happened to have a sport psychology clinic on the campus. And this was like, 2010, 2012. So, I mean, there are things that are growing now, but looking at, several years ago, a decade ago at this point, that wasn't commonplace at all. And a
Right.
professor had an interest area in it and they did it. And so our roles, we did a lot of concussion evaluating and return to play decision stuff, along with we were the therapist on retainer for the student athletes. They would always come to us rather than the counseling center for clinical needs. And then we also did sport performance for those athletes that were interested in that as well. So it was kind of a one-stop shop and a really unique avenue for those athletes and a resource on that campus. And for me, I had done some other things through school in different areas of psych. And I was like, all right, I can't imagine doing this forever. I can't imagine doing this forever. And then when the athlete psych combination hit, I was like, okay, like this is a world I understand. That's a world I grew up, I lived in. Now I'm adding the newer at the time psychology piece. And so I just never really looked back.
Yeah, and I am curious about a thing because you told me this when we were down in Texas too. You said like I purposely sought out a college without a pool. So like and then you end up, pursuing sports psychology. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
if take us back to 17, 18-year-old Megan who's like, I I want to be done with swimming. Like what was
Yeah.
going on with how had it gotten to that point and what point were you at looking at the sport
Yeah.
of swimming at that point?
And it's so interesting now that I look back at it because I didn't have the words for it. And I think it was the same with retiring from softball, but definitely with swim. I was so anxious about it, and it was
Mm,
just this whole area of stress of like, well, how's this going to go? And then like day getting up to a meet, I'd be sitting in class and just like thinking about it and what's going to happen and what's going to happen. And so now, and I think that's why the sport and psychology world like resonated with me, because it helped me put a language to this experience that ultimately, for me, I was like, I'm done. Like I don't need this. I don't need that additional stress. And I oftentimes find myself kind of thinking back and wondering, what if sports psych existed? I mean, it existed, but like to
in
the
the way that
professional
it does
people,
now. Yeah.
what if it existed in the way that it does now, to young individuals that's teaching this skill set to put this language on this, like, I can't eat, I have a hard time sleeping, I can't stop thinking about it. Like that was really unpleasant for me. But now I like kind of see back, and I wish it existed. But for me, I think that in kind of trying to understand and reflect back on my athletic career, that was really the driving force that made me like, I no longer want to do this. I'm going to focus on school. I'm going to focus on dance. Like those were other things that I enjoyed. I still wanted to be active, but I just had no interest in continuing, I think, that level of additional stress for myself, which
Yeah.
if I go back would have been cool. I don't know what would have happened, but yeah, I was
Still
done,
time. There's still time. I
you
mean,
know,
like I just started competing in swimming again. There's still time for you, if you
it's true.
if you ever reconsider it. But I tell people all the time, like one of the inflection points that led to me doing what I do now was I've had a lifelong love of the sport of swimming. But when I
Mm-hmm.
was finishing in college, when I swam my last race in college, I remember the thought that I had standing in the shower, and it was, thank God I never have to do that again. And,
Wow.
like I returned to that moment quite a bit to think about how did I get to a place where this was something that I loved doing and I still love doing. And yet it became something that I was like, I can't wait to stop. I
Mm-hmm.
can't wait to just get away from this. And I find it endlessly fascinating exploring how, something can go from something so healthy and good and functional for you into that really dysfunctional space. And I'm guessing, based on what you just told me, that is an area of interest for you as well.
Absolutely. And it's sports, the culture of sport is so different now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It is cutthroat. It's so much more competitive. There's such much more higher expectations. I mean, it's become a business entity, youth sports, more
Mm,
so than anything. And a lot of times the age of the athletes I work primarily with college athletes and then with high school athletes, it's around probably high school, maybe the end of middle school, that this thing that they did when they were like 10, and it's just fun and you go and do it, this stress relief becomes the stressor. And so that evolution is a really interesting point for me, because I see it all the time. And on the first day, whenever I meet with athletes, I'm always like, all right, so like, why are you doing this? Why do you, oftentimes they'll do a variety of other emails, not other emails, other sports. And I'll be like, and
right.
they've retired from them, but why are you still in swim? What is it about that? Um, to help them try to reconnect and find like the fun, like what was that thing when you were 10 that kept you coming back, that maybe as things get more and more competitive we just lose sight of.
So it's interesting you bring up this theme. You say stuff has gotten more cutthroat over the last 15 to 20 years. What are some, I guess, what are some like examples? So, what are some stuff that stands out to you that you think has changed in the culture? And I guess you're also holding this in the same, right? You notice that at the same time, the culture is devolving in one way, it is
Mm-hmm.
evolving in another way with the way that people are just integrating sports psychology into like viewing it more as a piece of a natural piece of everything that's happening versus like,
Right.
well, that's sort of an exceptional thing that maybe um, a very small, tiny percentage of people, quote unquote, need. So,
Yeah.
what are some of the changes in the culture you've observed over the course of time doing this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, I think swimming, we're a little bit like insulated from it because swimming has been like a year-round sport for a very long time.
Right.
Especially, club swim like that has been the culture. But you look at the other sports, soccer, basketball, baseball, those were not year-round situations. And now athletes are specializing in doing these year-round things at younger and younger and younger ages, and having, I had a friend whose nephew was 7, 5 days a week baseball. Like, what? I mean, like there's where it's just these younger and younger ages, we're seeing earlier and earlier specialization. There's now also, and everything's a blessing and a curse, right? There's two ways of looking at it. We now also have so much more knowledge and information of strength and conditioning and these external things. And so these athletes, not only is it, year round, they're specializing younger and younger, but then there's all the extras. It's like, and parents, they go into it just wanting to provide the best for their kids. And oh my goodness, if so and so has this extra hitting lesson, well, I want to provide that for my kid. And so now you have, your practices multiple days a week, then you have hitting lessons, then you have pitching lessons, then you have this lessons, and then you have strength and conditioning, and then you like it has become just bigger. And as a result of that, so much more money from parents are being output into it. And so I hear comments, not infrequently, from the parents, but then also the kids of just like, oh yeah, my mom said that they're not going to pay for my extra lessons anymore if I don't perform X, Y, or Z, which
Mm,
like, that is really stressful. And then you look at, club sports. Years ago, it would be, okay, maybe like 1 or 2 clubs in the area for soccer or whatever. Now any parent that's like, I think I'm going to have an interesting business venture. My kid is about to be this age. Like there are new clubs that pop up all the time, and there's different, and you have to like try out. I mean, the culture around it from that standpoint has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. So now there's this like pressure of competing and performing, and now kids are doing like more and more and more specialized. So now they're not having other hobbies, not other activities. And then you even look at some of the sideline things that are happening where there's research that's showing like parents are increasing their like maybe not so positive behaviors towards referees and towards other parents. And so there's this like WWF culture, on the sidelines of things, of them like just screaming and yelling. And whenever I do a parent talk, the first thing I ask is why are we here? Why, you chose to have a child and you made the choice to then put them in sport. Like, why? What was the goal? And it's oftentimes like dealing with failure, working well with other people, time management, like doing something as a team, all of these really great things. But then I show this video and it's a U12 softball tournament where there is an all out parent like brawl. And the girls are trying to rip their parents off of other parents and crying. And I mean, like, what is that? Like, how
I
is that this? How?
I ended up in an argument. I've talked about it on this podcast. I ended up in an argument. My daughter is 9 years old. When she was 8, we signed her up for the town recreational soccer league. This is recreational soccer for second graders. And the first game that I went to, first off, it was amazing, and I can see why parents get so emotional and so passionate about their kids doing sports, because it was the most fun I had at a live sporting event for a long time, because it's somebody that you love is doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like you have such a strong emotional investment. But I ended up in an argument with a guy at the first game because they had like, so it was 8 year olds playing soccer. I would estimate maybe 13, 14 year olds refereeing the thing, and some guy was just yelling at this 13-year-old girl, and I was like, man, if we just like pile abuse on this person, these kids aren't going to be allowed to play soccer, because there's going to be nobody that wants to do this. This
Hmm.
person's, you know, just like just a kid who stepped up so that younger kids could play a game. And like it's not the end of the world if she misses a couple calls. Like, who cares? And then I
Right.
was then I but then I was aware, like, oh man, am I making a scene? I'm having an argument with this person at, the event. And at the same time, even in the background, another theme that you brought up is, I was aware at the same time that there was like, the travel soccer team for 8 year olds somewhere that I had not signed my kid up for. And like, oh no, are we now behind? Right. I think that is a very common anxiety for parents. Are you somehow setting your kid up for failure because you're not giving them enough resources early on? Now,
Mhm.
you mentioned this earlier. Primarily, you work with college age athletes, so it's interesting. Like we start talking about what changes in the culture. You're talking about a lot of stuff that starts at 7 years old, even. Um, what went into the decision then to say, well, I'm going to work with people that are at the collegiate level primarily, versus like, I'm going to come up with something to do for the parents of 7 year olds, or somehow,
Yeah.
with 7 year olds. What went into that for you?
For it honestly was just kind of the client base. I mean, it's who calls, right? And it just happens to be the parents of oftentimes college kids and then high school kids.
Because
But
that's
whenever
when it's reached the point that they're like, we can't go on
right
like this anymore.
there, because there's performance anxiety is like that is I think 95% of the presenting problem, and you know, it, parents never call on a good day.
Right.
Rarely. I shouldn't say never. They rarely call on a good day. So typically the order of events is something happened last night and it's not the first time at a game, kids in tears, there's like just frustration, there's stress, and the parents are like, I don't know what to do. And so it just happens, because that's kind of when some of the volume gets cranked up. Now, with that being said, I have some gymnasts and things that we are hanging out in middle school because like that sport is that's a whole other culture and a whole other thing. But yeah, it just kind of evolved into primarily that. But whenever I do, because I work individually, but then I'll also work with teams, and sometimes that's for a season, sometimes it's multiple seasons in a row, other times it's just sort of, hey, we'll come in, we'll do like one seminar. But whenever I do that, I'm always like, for free, I will come and I will talk to your parents. Like,
Yeah.
open seminar for whatever, and then I'll kind of talk with the coaches a little bit beforehand of what are some of the trends that you see with your club and with your parents, because the thing that I think it's really important to remember about parents that we see like blowing a gasket on a sideline is they're doing it so much because they care, right? Like it's
Right.
like I have this emotional investment in this little human being and I want them to have everything I didn't have and everything everybody else has. I just want to give them the opportunity that whatever they choose to do, I am providing a really good foundation of liftoff for it. And I compare it to like if I were to do someone's taxes, I would have really, really, really good intentions and I would want to do it well, but I just don't know. That's not the
You're not
area
an
I live
accountant.
in. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be like, TurboTax told me to ask this question, but like I'll probably miss a lot of things, or and
Yeah.
even though my intentions are solid and I want to help this person get money back or whatever, there's just stuff I don't know because I don't live in that world. And so for parents kind of in the sport world, that is like a side passion of mine of how can we kind of help to shift this culture, because there's a lot of research that supports when sports are done well, character development, positive all around. But when sports are not done well, opposite, like it is not providing that character development, qualities and skills that ultimately most parents put their kids in sports to learn. And so so keeping sports doing it right, is really important for the investment of those like small to medium size, someday going to be full size humans.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that now my mind is going in a million different directions based on some of the stuff you're saying, and I just have so many interesting areas that I want to explore. But one of them is, as you say, like sports done right, and this is something I think about so much because I am one of those people who like really believes passionately that there is a right way to do things. People who listen to the podcast know I am prone to go get on my moral high horse and ride it straight out of town.
Yeah, man.
So it is just how I see things. And so, but what I run into a lot, and I'm wondering if you run into this as well, and how you think when you run into it, is that in if you have a competitive situation, right, there are always going to be people who, when they're faced with that competitive situation, start compromising on some of the things that are right in order to give themselves a leg up competitively. And that is, that gives you a lot of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like authority in youth sports. Like, you're the best team producing the best results. You probably have people that come to you, right? They come to you with performance anxiety. They don't want to hear, well, here's a healthier way to do it. And, maybe you won't be as good, or, like you'll
Yeah,
maybe you'll get worse at gymnastics, but you'll have more love in your heart. Like, they don't want to hear that, right? They want to hear, like,
right.
come in here, fix it so I can do even better than I'm doing right now. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah. First of all, I told him to go get another hobby. Like straight off the bat, I'm like, go do something else. Like, because the more we can, I use the examples, especially in the swimming world, of like Kate Ledecky and Elizabeth Beisel, two women that were so incredibly successful. A couple years ago, they're at the ESPYs just like shredding on the stage. Kate Ledecky's playing the piano and Elizabeth's accompanying her on the violin. It's like, see these people that did this at such a high level, like you can do other stuff and
Yeah.
it's not going to be of a detriment to you. So I sometimes get this like very shocked look where I'm like, listen, my challenge for you the week is I want you to go find a hobby that has nothing to do with like whatever sport you're in, because we're trying to develop you as a whole person. And if like you get a bad grade and then you have a bad practice and now you're like into like your identity is crumbling because you feel like you suck at everything, like now we're just setting that 15-year-old up to fail, and,
Yeah.
and not to mention at any point in time. And this is, I think, something that it's like we should talk about a little more, is like sports aren't permanent. I mean,
Mhm.
swimming has the opportunity more so than many sports to be permanent or more of a long-term fixture in people's
Right.
lives. But like you could send a kid to practice today and they come back with an injury and they're done.
Yeah.
And now what? Right?
Right.
What are you going to talk to them about? Because you guys don't have any other connection points. What are they going to do to help them, like, oh my goodness, I'm losing this huge thing. And so I try to like, promote that big picture. This past weekend, I think myself and many other people were talking about this idea of process over outcome, process over outcome. I joke to my athletes, I'm like, I feel like I'm the hype man for like the process, because I talk about it all the time of, if we're focused on the process, you're going to ultimately stress yourself out less and get closer to that outcome every
Right.
time. And so when I do have those kids coming in of like, oh, this is happening, I need to fix this or this and that. And it's like, all right, well, let's break it down. Because you standing up behind the block, freaking out about this time you want to get, well, now you're diving into the water in a much different physical space than practice. Not helpful. You're stressed out, not helpful. And you're not thinking of anything that's ultimately going to get you from one side of the pool to the other faster.
Right.
So let's, and so those are some of the ways, and I'll try to use stories, I'll try to use, examples of other athletes, and I'll try to, show them the science of, listen, this maybe. So I'll have some athletes be like, well, if I'm not focused on that, then it means it doesn't care because that's what my coach tells me. And I'm like, no, it means that you
Mm.
care so much that you're finding ways to help you perform better. Like that's the goal here. And so yeah, an interesting push and pull sometimes, of really. And I feel I sometimes like then come out a little jaded of just like, I want to continue to love sports. And I think it's starting like my career mission over time. Initially it was like, hey, I'm going to like help these individual athletes, reach peak performance. And like, yes, that's still something I want to do, but also I see the bigger picture in the sport culture, and as a former athlete, and how it was such a positive thing in my world. Like I now at this point, I'm like, what are things that I can do through talking to the coaches, through talking with the parents on these larger scales, so that we can keep sports fun, we can keep sports competitive, and we can keep kids in sports as long as we can, and how can we kind of make this culture, as fun as it once was for as long as it can be.
Right. Yeah, I think you just got to a point that I just want to highlight that the way some of this makes sense to me is that, when you make a decision to sort of go off in your very individual situation, or in the short term, you make like a competitive sort of compromise. Maybe you get a little advantage out of that, but you are almost taking out a high interest loan against your long term like sustainability of doing
Yeah.
whatever it is you're doing sport wise, and on a broader level the sport itself, right? Because if sports become something that, like, the perception by a lot of people is just like, oh yeah, sports is where you send your kid, and then eventually it devolves into destroying their mental health. Parents are going to sign their kids up for that. Like, they're going to go like, let's find something else where my kid's going to, come out of this healthy and happy, and something else. And I want to reiterate another piece you said about this. I love the piece about hobbies. One of my early exposures into the like highest level of elite swimming. I went over to coach in Denmark for several years. And for my professional development, I said, I don't want to go on any conferences. I don't want to take any classes. Let me go to the National Training Center, and I just want to watch them practice for a week, and meet the coaches there. And there's an Australian guy who I've referenced on this podcast before, Shannon Rawlson, who was running it. And he had taken over for a coach where the Denmark Danish swimming has just been over a scandal where they had a series of really hardline coaches. These coaches, the scandal was all built around that they were weighing the swimmers live on deck and then being like, you fat pig, like you need, it was crazy, crazy stuff. And nobody put a stop to it. Right. So this guy comes in on the backs of that, and he's had all these people. The message they've been given is, you've got to sacrifice everything else. That's the key to, getting to the highest level of swimming. And he just sort of went one by one, going through like, what else are you going to do with your life? You're going to go back to school? You want to, like, you want to paint? He sort of just like nudged everybody into doing something else. And he said, well, actually, it's a really important part of this. And that was the first time I'd ever gotten exposed to somebody like this. And so it probably leads
Yeah.
to me now in the work that I do, asking a question, which I'm sure you ask some variation of, like, I'll just be talking to an athlete that I'm working with, and I go like, what do you do for fun? And if there's a big drawn out silence on the other end of that,
Mm-hmm.
I know, okay, that's an area for for growth.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Every time.
Um,
Every time.
what do you do to relax? Right, like some variation to that question,
Yeah.
because you can get your life. And I know, for instance, in my own history in swimming, I got totally imbalanced. I mean, I swam through college, as I said, and at certain points, I think I got berated by my coach once for skipping class, right, the entire day. But I came to 2 swim practices, and he was like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life? That everything is just like swimming first, right,
Yeah.
before literally anything else." And I look back on it, I know it wasn't. I know it wasn't good. I know it didn't actually help me to do the thing that I wanted to do, right? Even if I
Right.
isolate it as wanting to swim fast. So I'm going to ask you. I'm going to get a little bit into the work that you're doing, because we've been like, touching it here and there. So you do one-to-one coaching with
Mm-hmm.
athletes. You work with teams, as you said. Sometimes it is a season-long engagement. Sometimes it is a one-off. Sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
is year after year after year. You're working on a um, project. Anything else that you do? I want to make sure people who are listening to this have an awareness of like,
Yeah.
what does Dr. Meg do?
Yeah. So those are two. I say there's like kind of like 4 areas. The first is, the individual stuff. The second is in working with teams. And then as a function of that, the coaches and the parents. Also things like this past weekend in Golf Swim, where conferences and different organizations where I can educate a bunch of people at one time versus like the 20 members of this team or that one person sitting in the room. And then most recently, because I see, yes, because I'm in it and I believe in the work that I do, but I see the need for it. I see the need for it. I also see, especially as we get to, some of like the Division 3 levels, where there's not as much funding, but also as you're trickling into high schools, the money for sports psychology resources is just not there nor prioritized. And then also with individual families, like things are expensive, and so
Right.
a more recent thing that I've been tackling is how can these resources be much more accessible to individuals, and also how can I reach people, because it's, I talk about the same stuff all the time, so I know that there's a need for it. And so I basically took 10 sessions, like things that would go session by session with these athletes that I meet with individually, and put them into an online, like just self-study program that they can, each module is about 15 to, I think the longest one might be a little over 20 minutes. They have like worksheets, there's different bonus relaxation things, just an opportunity to like meet them where they're at, not only from you can fit this in when you can and do it at your own pace, but also, I don't know a ton of families, because I mean, insurance does not cover sport performance. My athletes in
Right.
Pennsylvania, where I am, I'm as a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania, I do have a fair amount of athletes that, there's anxiety, there's depression going on, and they happen to be athletes. And so that's our work together is a little bit more clinical. But even my sport performance athletes in Pennsylvania, insurance will laugh in your face if you think that that's something that you're going to get any money back. And, that just, in my mind, it doesn't sit right that from a financial standpoint, that's a barrier for people learning life skills. Right now, you're going to apply it in swimming. Beautiful. If that's what you can like, if that's what's going to get you to buy in, okay, great.
Right.
You
If
want to
that's
like
my
shave some
pathway for
seconds off.
teaching this stuff, I'm going to take
Right.
it. I'll
I'll
take it.
take it. I'll do it. I'll use all the analogies. Like I'll speak sport to you. But I know that when you're 25, 35, 45, 55, the physiology of anxiety is the exact same. The strategies and tools, like they're the things that, have the opportunity to apply for the rest of your life. And so for me, figuring out that like online method that I can reach these people at a much lower price, they can do it at their own time, just eliminating some of the accessibility barriers, is kind of the fourth arm that within this last year I've added on as well.
Very cool. And I get the sense just from our brief time getting to know each other, you're busy. Like you get out to quite a few teams. You work with a lot of athletes. Like you are busy. You're doing a lot of work in this. So I guess now I'm going to turn the question on you. Like, what does Dr. Mega do for fun?
Oh, so many things. Well, I love like the gym, like that is just like my little, I don't have to talk to anybody, like heavy space. I also
You work
try
out
to
by
do,
yourself. You're like
yeah,
you're an asocial exerciser. You're in the gym,
yeah,
headphones. Like
yep. And I'll go to
I'm
classes, but
yeah, I call it dumbbell meditation, right? Like
yeah,
I'm holding something and I'm processing all my thoughts, and yeah, I'm just in my own little world for however
yeah.
long.
Yes, so that's a big thing in my world. And then I'll just do different like adventures that somehow tie back to work. Of I've done different Spartans or different Ragnar, like these like 200-mile road races, just to be like, this is stressful to me, to practice some of the stuff I preach. Like golf, that's I'm really really stoked for the upcoming golf season. I just got upgraded my club, so I just cannot wait to get out there once we get rid of the snow, which will be great. So that's where I spend a lot of time in the summer, along with like hiking and just being outdoors. I mentioned this at golf, like 2 years ago I went to Africa and did Mount Kilimanjaro, and that was like the coolest
Wow.
thing. But like you're hiking overnight 17 out of 20 hours on the like 7-day trek in the middle of the bush in Africa. Like I tell my athletes that, I'm like, yo dude, like that's not a physical thing
Hmm.
at all. Like you got, and so because also I want to demonstrate to the kids I work with, like I'm not just some adult like telling you stuff. Like I do these things, and here are some of the things that I do, and then I just get to maybe travel and go do some fun stuff. So this summer I have a trip to Yosemite planned, and I got half dome permits are applied, and I'm fingers crossed that we'll be able to get them. And just outdoorsy active stuff to me is the chill and the zen.
It's so interesting too, though, that like some of the stuff you referenced, right? Like it's pretty extreme, right? Going up, as you say, like Mount Kilimanjaro. That's like that I would say is on the extreme level. What do you find? Because I think it's not obvious to everybody, like how that can be really beneficial to you, right? I mean, I think we can start to associate that with some of the dysfunctional stuff we talked about earlier, where you go like, yeah, sports taken too far, right? It's just like it'll just crush you. So why do you view it as a positive? Like what's in it for you? What do you get out of going up Mount Kilimanjaro
Yeah,
or doing a
that's
200
a
mile
great
race?
point. Right. Part of it is that like, okay, I have a goal, and even though, yes, I like going to the gym, but I don't love it all the time, and so just like that, having the goal and working towards something. And I think for that adventure specifically, I went with like a group of friends. And so it was this very cool, like, hey, like we're doing this thing together, and like we're supporting each other through it, and like we're in it. And that Kilimanjaro in particular, at the end of that, I was like, whoa, like I did that. Like that's crazy. And that's not something I'm going to do all the time, obviously. But there was like this kind of interesting moment of confidence of like, wow, well, if I could do that, and if I could figure that out, um, I could probably do some other stuff too. And so I think for me, it was a confidence thing, it was a social thing, and all right, this is in a year. And
Yeah,
this was also during COVID times. Like, so I did summer of 21. So
right.
it
Two
was
years
like
ago,
gyms
yeah,
were still, questionable. And so it was like how can I stay motivated to do these like healthy behaviors for myself that I enjoy? Well, if I know that I'm doing that in like 6 months, then yeah, I guess I'm gonna go put some weights in a day pack and go walk around because I want to be able to do that for real.
right. Right. And I see even in the way you're talking about it, like giving yourself, you're actually you're giving yourself what you want, even though it's something that's extremely challenging, right? I mean, sometimes we can think of these ambitious goals as something that we have to do, right? And the way you set it up for yourself, even just describing it, it was like, no, I'm kind of trapped in my house, and gosh, wouldn't it be great to go to Mount Kilimanjaro? And wouldn't that be like a once in a lifetime experience? Just go and do that. You're making me want to go, even though I'm not really a mountaineer myself, or I'm not built, not so much built for the for long races. Yeah, I guess that would be my best way of describing it. All right, now we got to get to some really important stuff at the end here, Dr.
Yes.
Meg. Okay. I'm gonna mess up which WrestleMania this was in the mid '90s, but Hulk Hogan wrestled Yokozuna, and in the
Mhm.
middle of the match, the ref was not looking. Mr. Fuji threw salt into Hulk Hogan's eyes. Is it an illegitimate championship for Yokozuna?
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean,
I believe so.
that was one of the greatest injustices of my childhood, and I've been waiting for a long time to get somebody on the podcast to appropriately hammer out. But of course, I'm bringing this up because you and I were exchanging emails in advance of this, and I dropped some. I guess isn't the term you would know better than me? K fob, is that how you say it? The
Like put him
the
over.
yeah, I said I would put you over on the podcast, and then you unleashed like this knowledge of course, what was WWE when we were kids is now, sorry, WWF when we were kids, and now
Hmm.
is WWE. And you have a lot. We were out to dinner. You were talking about your interest in the Great British Baking Show. Mary Liston, who
Yep.
I've also referenced on this podcast, let you know where you could find the first 5 seasons. Um,
Yeah.
but what did you, if I could go back to my childhood, I've often thought about this. What did you like about wrestling? I was totally surprised. First off, I guess I'm being a bit sexist that I didn't think there were any girls who were interested
Yeah,
in
it's
wrestling
fair.
at the
It's
same time
fair.
I was. But what did you like about that growing up? Like what drew you to that as
Yeah.
a as a
Um,
yeah, swimmer, dancer, softball player?
I had an older brother and him and his friends would do it. And so I thought it was so cool. And so then I would just like sit in there and like that. So it was my way of trying to be cool like my brother. And I had a couple friends who they also had older brothers that watched it. And so then it was like pay-per-view parties and stuff. And also, to be fair, I mean, have you seen Dwayne Johnson? This was like back in the days where like The Rock was coming out and that man without a shirt on got me hooked very, very easily. So I fell in love when I was like, 12. My friends would have like NSYNC posters on their wall, and I had like a 6'5" Samoan man. That's just what it did. And it was like really was into it. My 13th birthday was went to SmackDown, and it was one of
No
the best nights of my
way.
life. Yeah,
Oh
it
my
was pretty
gosh.
cool. The Rock versus Chris Jericho. That was big. It's big
And so
times, big times.
would it be fair to say The Rock was your favorite wrestler? Because I have
Oh,
a favorite.
100%.
I'm a little bit. I think my WWF stuff predates you a little bit. I was a giant fan of Ravishing Rick Rude. That was my favorite wrestler
Oh
back in the
yeah.
day. Um, and obviously Hulk Hogan was very, very big in those days as well. That my emotional attachment to that moment.
Oh yeah.
When I was still, I'm going to look it up after this, and maybe I'll put it in the show notes or something. I believe it's got to
You
be
need
like
to.
it's got to be like WrestleMania in like 1995 or 1996.
Oh, it's
But to be at that peak age where you sort of know what's going on, but you don't know what's going on, because I
right.
really was like very, very upset.
Well,
That
and
like
now
this
we
is
know,
rigged.
this is the origin of like I'm gonna ride into the sun on my moral high horse here because back in the day when
Right.
Hulk Hogan was cheated out of his championship,
Unbelievable.
no.
It's just like what kind of,
Um,
again, I wanted to react like the guy at the 8-year-old soccer game. I just was screaming at at
yeah,
that ref.
man.
And I don't know. I also think there's an aspect of it that I haven't watched a lot of wrestling since then, but I find myself drawn back into it because I it's weird that you think of like wrestling as fake, but there is something very authentic about them just sort of going like, this is a performance.
Hmm.
This is a performance. Do you like watching a cool performance? You like watching some athletes do really athletic stuff?
Yeah,
Like instead of, like this is a real sport. Okay. A lot of the real sports is just like we've just decided it's fun to have people swimming up and down the pool and see which one touches
yeah,
first. Right? We've decided our two people are going to run against each other. These people are going to kick a ball, and one of them puts it in the net some more times than the other one, and then so it is all in a certain sense a performance, and I mean that in the best way possible, right? Not in the
yeah,
way where you have people coming to you like, oh my god, what am I going to do? I have to perform
yeah,
well. More just like this is fun.
yeah. And I think, if we all had that perspective and the truth is, and this is where I don't want to like be jaded and pessimistic, but like when we look at the amount of kids, and that's we can talk the littles all the way through middle school, through high school and college, and the actual percentage of them that are ever going to make it their job or make money from it. I mean, half the sports don't even have professional leagues. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and even
so
if you
it's
count
this
scholarships and all that piece of it, like it is.
and just they don't even exist any. And that's literally whenever I talk to parents, I'm like, number one thing you need to know. Like this,
Yeah,
these don't exist anymore in the fashion, that they
right.
maybe did, years
Right.
ago. It's just not the reality anymore, especially after COVID. Um, the goal of sports is performance. It's having fun. And those dudes in WWE, if they like have some costumes and are able to like rip around a mic and stuff, cool. It just like makes it a little bit more engaging, but it's no different than performing at a meet or at a basketball game. And ultimately, we're putting kids or people in a pressure cooker situation and challenging them to like, all right, you've practiced really hard for this, you've rehearsed it, you've done it, you know what you're going to do, now go do it to your best capacity or capability. And now we have a really safe way for kids to like be stressed and to fail and to let and do it in a
Mm-hmm.
way that then we
Mm-hmm.
can like take them home and cook them a nice little dinner and like whatever, because they're not it's not a career for most people. And it's wonderful for those that it is. But
Right.
if, as a parent, I'm putting my kid into a sport when they're 8, being like, I just cannot wait to be like the mom at the Olympics, like watching my kid. Like, well, that's gonna be a long road for everyone in that
Yeah.
situation, And so I think if we were able to make it fun and kind of view it, maybe it's not as scripted, or maybe some
Yeah.
organizations are, which we don't know about, but maybe it's not as officially scripted as like the WWE, but like it's still just a fun thing. And it's a way for, I tell my kids all the time, like, you have the skills. It is your character qualities of time management, your strength, your athleticism. And right now, whatever sport you have is your vehicle.
Yeah.
But take away that sport, you still have all those qualities, you still have all those characteristics. You can choose to find another vehicle to share your talents with the world, or you don't have to. It would be great if you did, because you have them, but it's you. And if swimming's your vehicle, or basketball, baseball, soccer, softball, that's great. And it's a wonderful vehicle for you to show the world all of these really cool character qualities and strengths and abilities that you have. And that's all it is at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I wouldn't mind if Caleb Dressel, just worked a little bit of Ric Flair type promo into the Paris Olympics.
Could
Like,
you imagine?
let
Those
me tell you
post-swim
something about
interviews would be
Kyle
amazing.
Chalmers. Yeah, like
Get some costumes, get a belt. I mean, I really, you know,
and when we meet in Paris, like just a little bit of that. Okay, Dr. Megan or Dr. Meg, what am I supposed to call you? I've been doing this for
oh, Meg.
45 minutes. If people want to learn more about what you do, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to engage you on any one of these things, where should they go?
Yeah. So my overall website is just drmegancannon.com,
Awesome.
DrMeganCannon, like really like the most basic spelling name.
Yeah, you have such a
Um,
great sports name too, Dr. Megan Cannon. Like,
you know,
so badass.
I appreciate that. I when I was little, I was like, Cannon, that's not a real last name. It's just like an artillery weapon. It's not real. Like, one too many ends to be part of like the camera fortune. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so my website's pretty easy. My email is on there too, along with my phone number. I'm on this like the socials at Dr. Megan Cannon. MVPmindset.com is where I have information on that online program. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. And the best way of reaching out is just through a phone call or through email. And I'm so much like happy to talk this stuff with people because again, it's an area that I find really important, and it's fun for me to get to use sports to just ultimately help people become even better humans for the long run.
Yeah. I love the stuff that you're doing. I love having you on here. If people, my plugs at the end, ChristyCoach.com, on socials, Christy_coach on Instagram, and CD Swim Coach on Facebook. Thank you to everybody for listening to this podcast. Don't believe what my co-host tells you if you listen to one of my other podcasts. There's actually a lot of people that listen to this. So we and I think one of the reasons is we thank them every time. We are grateful for their listening. Seriously, I loved running into some people down in Texas that have listened to this and wanted to give their opinion on everything. That is actually one of the main reasons I do this, because I get to learn a lot from doing this podcast, and that's one of the reasons I had you on. I learned a lot from learning, and I want to pass that on to my audience as well. And as I said, this will go up a few days after recording. And then I should be back with our regular scheduled podcast, me and Joel Rawlings, next week. So everybody look forward to that. And again, thank you and see you soon.